Good afternoon, and welcome back to the next episode of our webinar series. I am Curtis Valentine. I am the director of the Future Learning Network here at the Progressive Policy Institute. Today's event we are calling Turnaround, Public School Choice and the Unlikely Story of New Orleans is co-sponsored by the 74. I'm also a part of the Reinventing America Schools project, which is housed here at PPI. Our project promotes a model of schools we call 21st century school systems, or systems that provide parents with more choice and give schools more autonomy in return for more accountability. Our research shows that public school systems that do this produce the most rapid improvement in student performance. Today's exciting webinar centers the story of how New Orleans, one of my favorite cities, reformed this education system after Hurricane Katrina through embracing public school choice and more autonomy and accountability for schools, but more importantly, how that story can impact urban education in America. We'll tune in to learn today from leading experts and practitioners on public education as they discuss the past, the present, and just as importantly, the future of education in New Orleans, but also around the country. Today's a sort of a reunion. We have the founder of our project, David Osborne here. And so we're going to get started. Before we jump into our panelists, we're going to have a brief talk with David. We're going to give you a clip of an amazing documentary that he has directed. And it's going to be an exciting time. David, good to see you again. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks, Curtis. Appreciate you doing this.
This is an exciting documentary that you've been working on for a while, a labor of love, but an incredibly important story. So before we get started, please share a little bit about your background and how you came to this topic of education, particularly in New Orleans.
Well, 40 years ago, I started writing books about public policy and how to make the public sector more effective. And what's the biggest part of the public sector? It's public education, has the most employees. And by any standard, I think it's one of the most important things that government does. So in all of my books, I talked about public education. And then, the second book, Reinventing Government, the one I'm best known for, at the end of that book, I included a chapter where I said, let's take these principles we've been describing, like customer choice and accountability for performance and decentralization and empowerment, and let's run three of our biggest domestic problems through them. And one of those I picked was public education. And when I did that, what it suggested was that what would really work well is a district made up of all charter schools, schools with a lot of autonomy, held accountable for their performance, choice for parents, a diversity of school models to fit the diversity of needs that kids have. And I was convinced of that, but no one else was. And then in 2010, the new mayor of New Orleans, Mitch Landrieu, asked me to come down and do some consulting. And while there, I think my first interaction with Leslie was a phone call. And I learned what was going on in the school system there and that they were actually doing it and that it was producing rapid improvement. And I just thought, okay, I got to write about this. And I did an article and then decided I got to do a book. And as you know, I wrote that while I was at PPI and started a documentary while I was at PPI and then retired and continued to work on the documentary.
And so why a documentary? Share your motivation for putting this on film, but also who helped bring this documentary to fruition?
Yeah, well, we have a team in New Orleans. Darcy McKinnon, who's a producer, has produced about a dozen documentary films in New Orleans. And Abe Felix, who helped her with the producing, helped me with the directing. Stephen Field, who was the editor, and then a variety of other folks who played other roles. So there's a team in New Orleans that's done the most of the work. Why did I want to do a film? Well, At some point, you realize as you keep publishing books and articles that you're a bit of a dinosaur, and that in today's society, if you really want to affect the culture, you've got to get it on television screens. And the New Orleans story is so dramatic and so important. I thought, wow, it's natural. It would make a natural movie. And so I started work on it. I'd never done anything like that before, but found Darcy. Somebody put me together with Darcy. McKinnon. She had been a teacher at the first charter school in New Orleans, had been involved with that charter network then all right through Katrina and afterward, and now was producing documentaries. So she was kind of a natural partner.
Well, I'll say you're a natural filmmaker. You're late to it, but I think you got the trick. So congratulations. We're going to show a clip, but before we do that, we have two amazing speakers who have joined us today, and I want to give them a chance to introduce themselves rather quickly. Say your name, where you're from, but one more question. Where were you when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans? So we'll start with you, Leslie. Tell us about who you are, what you do now, but more importantly, where were you the day that the hurricane hit the city?
So I'm Leslie Jacobs, born and raised New Orleans. When Katrina actually hit, I was evacuating with my daughter, who had a move-in day to college, and my 97-year-old handicapped grandmother, and trying to get out. Where I remember trying to get to Jackson, then Jackson Airport shut down. I was moving around trying to get her to Philly. But I was also on the State Board of Education as a governor appointee, and had a couple years previously spearheaded legislation that created the Recovery School District that we'll talk about. So I served on the New Orleans School Board as an elected official, and I ultimately served 12 years on the State Board of Education, first appointed by Mike Foster, a Republican, and then appointed by Kathleen Blanco, who was governor during Katrina, who was a Democrat.
Thank you so much. We also have Jerome Bryant, who has actually gone against the rules. The goal is not to dress better than the moderator, and he's done that today. So well, I didn't give him that memo. I should have earlier, but here we are. And so, brother, tell us who you are, where you're from, what you do, but also more importantly, where were you on that day?
No, listen, I appreciate the time and space to be with all of you. When Katrina hit, I was still in college. And I moved to New Orleans shortly thereafter in 2007, where I taught, and then I became a principal before becoming the CEO of Collegiate Academies, which is a charter management organization here in New Orleans. So my story really starts after Katrina in New Orleans, and the reform and challenge and opportunities, and just the deep blessing, right, to impact young people. And to see promises through. I'm originally from New York City, so I've had the chance to find my way here in New Orleans for nearly the last 20 years.
Outstanding. Thank you so much for both of you. Before we get into our conversation, audience, we're going to give you a sneak peek of this documentary. So here we go. Check it out.
In 2003, there was a story where the valedictorian of Fort Chaix High School could not walk across the stage and get her diploma because she could not pass the graduation exit exam.
We failed her. This is malpractice.
Every year, the state would publish failing schools, and New Orleans just dominated the list.
Kids who were labeled as seniors, who were reading on like the 5th and 6th grade level.
I was in the 8th grade reading on a 2nd grade level. That's basically like saying that, well, you can't read.
And that was more the norm than the abnormality.
And you can't use students as an example of what's wrong with public schools and not what's wrong with the policies that created the conditions.
The structures that we have for public education are mired in long-term political bureaucracies that make it hard to create conditions that facilitate the success for all young people.
It couldn't produce an accurate financial statement for years.
There was over $20 million of payroll fraud.
More than 24 indictments or guilty pleas.
It was rock bottom. It was perhaps the worst school district in America.
A woman by the name of Leslie Jacobs was on the state board and really pushed that we have to have in Louisiana some type of checks and balances.
When that young woman couldn't get her diploma, and at that moment I realized people had given up all hope on New Orleans public schools.
The vast majority of New Orleans, Louisiana is underwater.
No one knew if the city was going to come back or not.
Certainly had no idea what education would look like.
Katrina literally and figuratively washed away many of the institutional barriers that had prevented us from even imagining that we could begin to make some systemic changes to this school system.
I think a lot of people felt we have an opportunity to restart public education in New Orleans. We have to figure out how to do it differently.
Hello, everybody. Where are you at? It's good to be back in the Big Easy. We have data that shows before the storm, the high school graduation rate was 54%. Today, it's up to 73%.
In 2005, 62% of students in New Orleans attended failing schools. In 2015, that number's down to 7%.
Before the storm, college enrollment was 37%. Today, it's almost 60%. We still have a long way to go, but that is real progress.
There is real academic gains going on. The worst performing school today is significantly better than probably the midpoint before Katrina.
If every big city public school system in our country improved as much as New Orleans has over the past 15 years, that would be one of the most important things to happen to families living in poverty in our nation's history.
Because our children have been displaced, because they are living in poverty, because they're Black, does not mean that they cannot achieve. I find that if you pull that bar and you set it up real high, children will rise to the occasion.
The simple bottom line of what happened is the schools got a lot better and there's still a long way to go.
Just because we've got a system of autonomous schools does not make the challenges go away. We just have an ability to be more nimble, more creative in how to address those problems.
And I feel like if we continue to do those things, we're going to push New Orleans to a place where the rest of the nation will hopefully admire us and want to model after us.
Outstanding. Those of you who are watching, I'm sure you want to watch the whole thing now. I mean, you got some a nice tease, but there's so much more to the story, and we're going to cover a lot of it today. Those of you who are in education, those who are following the system, you all understand now that the education system in New Orleans is working so much better than most systems in this country by most measures now. But prior to Katrina, it was another story, dramatically different story, as the documentary, as you all saw, illustrated. Over 50% of middle and high school students dropped out of schools in New Orleans prior to Katrina, and fewer than 1 in 5 enrolled in college. You saw it, and the rumors around the country, unfortunately, were rather true. Leslie, I want to start with you to sort of put context around this conversation. What was life like in New Orleans for parents and students from your perspective prior to Hurricane Katrina hitting the city?
Well, from the perspective of schools, I mean, people liked their school. We had neighborhood schools, but we were truly warehousing children. When I was on the state board, we were given the California Achievement Test. And I had them look at, we had a K through 5 structure and a 6 through 8. And we take these little kids at the end of 5th grade and we put them in these massive middle schools that combine neighborhoods, and they were horrific, truly warehousing kids. And so I had the department say, how did kids perform at the end of 6th grade relative to the exact same cohort? How were they performing at the end of 5th grade on the same test? And not only did the kids not grow in 6th grade, at the end of 6th grade, they were performing worse than they had performed at the end of 5th grade. And so we had fires all the time in schools, so they'd be evacuated. In the film profiles, you saw Jay Altman speak and the charter school. Well, they had, they were taking over a school called Green, and we went and toured Green, and this was in May. This was in spring of 2005 before the levees broke, and literally it was out of a TV series. The teacher is reading the newspaper, kids are sleeping, the feet up on the desk, you walk in, and I think 2/3 of the kids were on parole, and there was zero learning going on in the building. And this was not atypical. And so we were just warehousing students. And the story of the valedictorian that people saw, again, I was on the state board and had access to the data. Over 20% of our seniors, meaning they didn't drop out, we got them to senior year. Over 20% of our seniors didn't graduate because they couldn't pass the state's graduation exit exam, which was at a 7th and 8th grade level, and they had 4 or 5 attempts to pass that test before they graduated.
So Dave, when people hear this, the first reaction is to blame. Like, who was to blame for how the system got this far? Was it the students that didn't care enough, or?
I think, let's be honest.
Parents. So I want to ask more directly, David. Where do we direct the concern? Was it students, or more importantly, were there systems? Was the system itself, or the issues with the system that led to these results?
I want to be honest and say probably the biggest thing we have to blame is slavery and the 100 years of Jim Crow that followed it, and the racism that followed was still operative in 2005. The federal government finally forced the schools in New Orleans to integrate in the 60s, and the whites left. I mean, by 2005, only 3% of the students in the whole system were white. And so, of course, the white voters kind of disinvested. The buildings were terrible. They were falling apart. They were not maintained. And then on top of that, you had a typical bureaucratic system where the principals didn't really have the authority they needed to hire and fire and change the nature of their school. There were no consequences really for failure. You know what they did for principals whose schools were failing? They promoted them to the central office. They kicked them upstairs. And so you had this huge bureaucracy in the central office that was basically not responsive to the schools, getting in the way. And, it was, and corruption on top of it. I mean, New Orleans has always had a lot of corruption, and it was there in the school system as well.
David, you often use the term bureaucracy. And for those who are listening, some people see it as a government term, but you have coined this in the documentary. For those once you watch it, will find out that this phrase bureaucracy of education. And it's in many ways, it's seen as the cause of systemic malfunction and even corruption, not only in New Orleans, but in a lot of large major school systems around the country. And Leslie, I want to come back to you before I come to Drew about this question. What does bureaucracy of education mean for those who are trying to figure out how you apply this to education? And how does it impact public education in America, not just in New Orleans, but around the country and particularly large school systems?
I don't know if I'm going to define it the way David would, but to me, bureaucracy of education at its heart is no one has the power. It is so diffused that you can hold no one accountable for anything, beginning with the school board and the superintendent. So I was on the school board. I could make nothing happen. I was 3 years, 3 months, and a day, and I was counting because I never worked so hard to accomplish so little. The district had 8 superintendents, I believe, in a 10-year period. You just churn them, and urban school districts churn them. So decisions large and small. So in the video, in the movie, I talk about textbooks. Every single year at the start of school, I went on major radio station and parents would call in no textbooks. So I tried to unravel this. Why weren't there textbooks? Well, the principal said they put in the order. Central office said they didn't put in the order. Then they're sitting in the warehouse. Nobody had responsibility from getting them to the warehouse to the school. If the new superintendent came in and wanted a new curriculum and the teachers or the principal in the building didn't want it, they could say, this too shall pass. So at the end of the day, all you have is finger pointing all across the board, and no one is accountable. And then those who have the responsibility don't have the authority. So you've split responsibility, authority, and accountability such that you can hold no one responsible for anything.
And so when people hear that term, they see it as sort of a governmental sort of leadership issue. But at the same time, Jarrell, this touches teachers, school leaders in a very personal way every day. So for those who are listening again, want to figure out, I keep hearing people use this term bureaucracy in education. How does what happens in what Leslie's talking about impact what happens in a school with teachers and students every day?
No, it's a great question. And I might not capture fully what David and or Leslie would define fully here. But I'll do my best, which is reductively, it's what are we most incentivized to do as practitioners at the school level or system level? And anytime that question is not answered by growing kids or chasing absolute outcomes for kids, then I begin to wonder what's in the way. And at our best, we are most responsive, right, to the kids and communities in front of us. And we're not waiting for a new school year. We're not waiting for a new contract, right? We're not waiting for new resources. We can act on that immediately. And that's what leads, right, to deep and fast growth. So I think to Leslie's point, when that runway is cleared, right, and when those conditions are clear, and when you wake up each and every day as a principal, a teacher, a supporter of a principal, and your sight is on what most moves kids, right? And then you're able actually to ask the next person in charge, right, for more with clear alignment. You're free of that bureaucracy, right? And I see anything in opposition to that to be a challenge. And I think to also note that just because it comes from the charter sector doesn't make it golden, right, in principle. And I think one of the beautiful parts of the work we do is that with greater autonomy, right, comes greater internal scrutiny and reflection. And it is our job to source best practices, right, for our kids, and to do that without tape best we possibly can.
And this sense of bureaucracy, this everything we're discussing, hit New Orleans and plagued a lot of pre-Katrina work that was done there. But you know, and David, in your book, you chronicled that it was not specific to New Orleans. Most urban districts had the same issue, but your book also highlights that many of them responded to this in a new way. So like, how have you seen in your research, David, other urban school systems like Indianapolis and Denver, which are chronicled in your book, respond to this bureaucracy of education in a new way? And how did that impact student learning in those places?
Before I answer that, let me just add to what Jarrell said by saying that this is what the bureaucracy was like. If he'd been a principal before Katrina, he couldn't have hired, he couldn't have chosen his teachers. They would have been assigned mostly by the central office. Couldn't have fired anybody who'd been teaching at least 3 years because they would have had tenure unless they broke the law somehow or molested a child, which is breaking the law. He would have controlled less than 1% of his budget. He couldn't have changed the length of school day. He couldn't have changed the length of school year, the whole schedule. I mean, he wouldn't have been a manager. The control was at the central office, not in the hands of the principal. and it's that lack of that centralization, that lack of empowerment of the people who actually have to do the work that is at the heart of bureaucracy. To answer your question, as the charter sector grew in the 1990s, I guess the first charter school opened in 92, and began to succeed, some districts looked at that and said, wow, we should try to, that autonomy, accountability thing and choice thing is good. Let's try to do that. And so some would create sort of internal charters. They were district operated schools in district buildings, but they tried to treat them like charters. And there were a lot of experimentation with different models. You mentioned Denver. They got a law passed which allowed them to create what they called innovation schools, which basically gave the principal and the leadership team at the school more autonomy and held them accountable for the performance of the school. But the problem is those central offices, they have habits. And, they struggle so much letting go. So I would interview principals who'd done this and then left in frustration because they'd spend a year negotiating an agreement with the district about what power they had and what power the district had. And it would say things like the school could choose its own textbooks. And so then the principal would go to order the textbooks, and some bureaucrat in the middle of the central office would say, no, we already ordered your textbooks, and then they'd have to fight for 6 months. And it's very hard to get a large organization that's set in its ways to change. So Indianapolis, which you also mentioned, chose a better model. They also went to the district leaders went to the state legislature, and working with the mayor, who actually authorized charter schools in Indianapolis, they asked for legislation allowing them to create innovation schools. They call them innovation network schools. But these schools were treated exactly like charters. They become nonprofits. They're legally independent of the district. They have a 5 to 7 year performance contract with the district. They are schools of choice. And if they perform well, they grow and maybe replicate. And if they perform poorly, then at the end of that contract, they are not renewed. And some other team gets that building. That model has been very successful. And I'm sure it drives some of the people in the central office crazy, but they don't have the power to block what the teachers at those schools decide they want to do. And some of those schools are new, and some of those schools are traditional district schools where the teachers voted to convert. So there are examples. It's always easier to start outside the bureaucracy and start something new, like charter schools. Changing large bureaucracies is possible, but it's very difficult.
Leslie, I want to get into the decision-making process after the storm to decide on this model in the city. So in post-Katrina New Orleans, a more decentralized model using publicly funded charter schools was introduced. Why did you all in the state believe that the public charter schools was the best model for New Orleans at the time?
So Curtis, to answer your question, I also want to have full disclosure. We were designing, building, and flying the plane all at the same time. You have to realize that you had Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Rita devastate Louisiana. So New Orleans went from having 65,000 students in August of 2005 to 12,000 students in May of 26. So what you see, we had the luxury of time to build it. But your question was why charters? In a few years prior to the destruction of the city, we had passed legislation creating the Recovery School District. And the concept there was when you had a chronically failing school, the district by its failure had said they couldn't do anything about it. So we wanted to take the school, the students, and the money away from the district and give somebody else the opportunity. And we chose charters of that model. So when the levies broke, there were 5 charter schools already in the Recovery School District. The city is shuttered, so the levies broke at the end of August. We really did not reopen the city until January of 26. A group of us, the state superintendent, some members of the state board, flew to this meeting in Houston, and there were all the Ed Trust was there. Paul Vallis sent someone from Philadelphia. There were all these people, and their advice was for us to show the world how to create a good traditional school district by starting over. And we left that meeting, all looked at ourselves and said, there is no way the State Department of Ed is going to run a good school district. And so we stuck with the charter model. And part of the allure of the charter model, particularly in the chaos of post-Katrina, was that you could attract schools opened with the best principals coming back, who were drawn to the ability to pick their own teachers, have control over their money. And so what began is we had this magnet to, it's a self-selection. You have to have a bit of entrepreneurialism. You have to have a bit of confidence. You have to want that power. A lot of principals actually don't want that level of power. They're very happy to say, it's out of my control. And we needed people that wanted that power because they were coming into a devastated area and had to figure out how to make things work to open schools.
Jarrell, I mean, we think about public charter schools from the lens of students, incredibly important. But as an educator, school leader, what benefits do public charter schools offer you, your colleagues, and those who are in leadership, particularly in public charter schools, not only in New Orleans, but around the country?
For sure. I think David and Leslie, began to paint a picture here through like more discrete examples from staffing latitude to budget. But I think at our best, it's a deep and accelerated growth for both teachers and team broadly, and kids, right? Without sometimes I think the red tape that prevents your best performers from most impacting more kids and more teachers and community at large, right? And so my hope would be that when you enter a public charter school, that you are most elevated, right, for your intentionality, your practice day to day, and what it means for kids. And again, the latitude that's been discussed by David and Leslie, that's also matched with accountability, can create that. I think the other aspect, especially in New Orleans and many urban districts and rural and more, is the ability to innovate around serving populations that have often not been served very well. And what that has looked like and what that has meant for conviction and practice has really moved the city quite a bit over the last 20 years. I mean, that's the genesis, right, and origin of the movement at its best. So for practitioners, it's also that, right, which is we can talk innovation all we want, but it's not innovation for innovation's sake. It's innovation for the sake of moving a population of people who deserve it. And when you have the ability to hire and promote and to use your resources towards the data in front of you, I would hope that we do better by kids.
Let me ask you, I want to follow up, Jarrell, and those who know me know my passion, particularly for male educators. There's a shortage around the country, and many of the excuses that we hear from districts are around the bureaucracies that are created in the hiring, training, and retention, particularly of educators who are high need, whatever your district is, whatever your model is, early childhood, you name it. Talk a little bit about, as a school leader, how the autonomy you have allows you to be very deliberate about staffing and how you find the right educators to fit the unique model of your school, if possible. And you're muted there, Drew.
It was the best comment I had all day. No, listen, our kids are powerful and amazing, but they're also dynamic, right? And so I think the ability to immediately meet the needs of kids. Let's talk staffing, right? And let's say just day to day. Let's say you have a model and you have a design of where you're going to place Mr. Osborne, right, Ms. Jacobs as teachers. But when you assess where your 9th grade cohort is entering in terms of reading levels, you might find there's a need for something more. There's a need for something less, right? And the ability to move adults, right, to add a tutoring block here, to think about how you can make your school day fit the needs of your kids and acceleration of what you have promised to families is that's it, right? That's the work. And we wouldn't be in the work if what was working previously or was it. That's why we're here. And again, that's never to invalidate the folks who have done great work with great intention. But again, with greater autonomy comes greater internal reflection and scrutiny. And that's not about quarterly, that's not about yearly, Curtis, that's about day to day. Can we genuinely say we're moving kids? And then we ask ourselves, well, what's stopping us from doing that? And the reality is us, right? When you have that level of autonomy.
David, I mean, again, we're talking from the experience of folks who work directly in the state of Louisiana, in New Orleans. But through your book and a lot of what you've done over your career is talk about how this can be a model for other cities. That is sort of theoretically. You've gone into cities, New Orleans, Denver, Indianapolis, Washington, D.C., spoke with leaders and said, how has this model of education, decentralized, more autonomy, more accountability, more choice, affected students? So talk a little bit, David, about what your research has showed you about how this worked. I'll say one thing, a confession. When I first met David, I realized that he was not someone who was sort of a zealot for charter schools from day one. And this is, which a lot of people you meet who often are slow to look at the data and scrutinize. I most appreciated it because it was something that you said, I come to this based off of the evidence of the stories I've heard from leaders like this and the data and comparing and being very, very critical of this stuff. And that's why I think you've gotten a lot of support from those who, again, didn't come to this like myself. Talk about what you've done, you've seen across the country, particularly on how charter schools have public charter schools have impacted school districts and what it's done for student achievement.
Well, as probably everyone watching this knows, charter laws are state laws. And we have, I've forgotten, it's about 45 states with charter school laws now. Can't remember whether it's 44, 45, or 46. Every so often another state joins. But they're different. The laws are different and the practices are different. So there are states where charter schools aren't much better than district schools. Michigan is a good example because Michigan's law allowed the creation of too many charter school authorizers. A lot of the colleges in Michigan authorize charter schools and they don't do a good job of it. And they don't replace, when a school is failing, year after year, they don't do anything. In a place like New Orleans, if a school fails for 5 years, it's gone. And a new team gets that building and those students. I mean, literally, there are about 80 schools in New Orleans, and they've closed for performance over the last 20 years, something like 40 schools. So they don't close the school, they bring in a new team and give them that school. But that accountability is huge, and it accounts for a lot of the improvement. So there are other places that have gone down this same kind of road. In DC, Washington, DC, probably New Orleans, from 2005 to 2015, it was clearly the fastest improving city in the country. For the last 20 years, from 2005 to 2025, I think DC probably rivals it. And one of the reasons is almost half the kids in DC attend charter schools. Congress passed a charter law that affects DC in 1996. I think the first charter opened in 98, and they grew rapidly. By 2007, they had about a third of the students, and the competitive pressure forced the mayor to do something. He got the city council to give him power over the schools, rather do away with the elected school board. He hired Michelle Rhee as chancellor, and she went in and changed things dramatically. And a offended a lot of people, but things began to improve in the district. And now you have both the charter sector and the district sector improving. They're among the fastest improving in the country. In fact, they claim right now they're the fastest, but they don't look at the data from New Orleans. So I'm not sure they're correct. Other places, Denver, when it was embracing charters, they lost a school board majority, and I think it was around 2016. But before that, for the 10 years before that, the district embraced charters and they got really rapid growth. Chicago, there was a period where they were embracing charters and getting rapid growth. And then the mayor, after a teacher's strike, agreed to slow down on charters. And it's interesting, if you look at the performance data, 4 or 5 years later, performance improvement slowed down. So Indianapolis is another rapidly improving city. 2/3 of their kids in the geography of Indianapolis public schools, 2/3 of the kids are in charters or innovation schools, and the authorizers there do their job. So Camden, New Jersey is another one where 2/3 of the kids are in charters or what they call Renaissance schools, which are neighborhood schools that are district operated, but they've contracted with a charter operator to actually run the school. So it is spreading. The teachers' unions hate this, as most people know, because most charter teachers don't choose to unionize. They can, and some do. I think in New Orleans, there's a couple of schools that have unionized, but most don't. They're treated as professionals, and most professionals don't feel they need unions. So as the charter sector grows, the teachers' unions shrink, and that's a direct financial threat, particularly to the leaders of the teachers' unions, who nationally are paid $500,000 a year, and lots of lieutenants making $200,000 a year. There's a lot of rice bowls that are being broken. So the teachers' unions fight very hard to convince us all that charters are failing and that we should have no more of them. But it's not true.
I just want to just jump in very quickly because David, you said something around accountability, right? School closures, operator shifting in New Orleans. And I think sometimes at a cursory level, that can fuel a narrative that public charters are in opposition to legacy or history or community. I think over the last 20 years in New Orleans, and we're still working on it, and certainly I've learned many lessons. You can't outsystem the folks in the system, the ones who live it and breathe it and are most impacted by it. And so I think there's actually great power and innovation even in looking at legacy, looking at community, and then figuring out how to refurbish that with a current model that most serves kids. And I think that is actually a part of the autonomy and the responsibility of a charter and a charter network to see the potential in that, right? And to see that the work we're doing, if you're open for 4 years, 5 years, whatever the case might be, and hopefully many, many more, it's impacting community, right, in generational ways. And so that has to be part of the schema, right, the clinical approach that we have to making this work, because I've seen it. Right, I've felt it. I've seen what a legacy high school can do.
Yeah, one of my favorite parts of the documentary is a long section about what Jarrell and Collegiate Academies and their team have done working with the community. So you've not just seen it, you've done it.
Curtis, I want to highlight one thing, though, that I think is real important for people listening. New Orleans has 2 levels of innovation. You have innovation at the school level, and Jarrell and Collegiate have done a fabulous job of innovation, some of it is highlighted in the movie. But we have a system level of innovation, because what you have is when every school is a charter school, the charters must serve all students. And so the real innovation to me in governance in New Orleans is figuring out what decisions best reside in central office and what decision-making best resides at the school level. And it's still a work in progress. But we've come in to say to the charters, you don't really get to decide who you serve. You get to decide how you serve them. And so We have a centralized enrollment system. They don't get to do de facto selection by you have to come visit the school or fill out an application. We have centralized expulsion, so you don't get to improve through pushing kids out. You don't get to improve through attrition. We have to backfill. When the schools first started, we'll take any kid in kindergarten, but as kids leave, we don't backfill. Well, if every school did that, then there's no way for any parent to have a choice and change a school. So we have impinged upon traditional charter autonomy in a number of ways to create not a collection of charter schools, but a system of schools. So when you look at DC or in Indianapolis, and I may be speaking out of turn, but I have found that generally speaking, charters rely on the centralized districts. So in DC, I know they take almost all of the severe, profound special needs kids in the traditional schools versus in the charter schools. In New Orleans, our charter schools have to handle all the special needs kids. And so we've had to come up with a differentiated funding formula that follows the students. And there are districts that have done that, but we've had to take all of this and put it in a thoughtful way in a system to realign what happens at the district level, what happens at the school level, so all students are served. And that is a different tweak to when you look at a traditional how our charters perform.
So let's get into the numbers. As they say, the proof is in the pudding. And since we're talking New Orleans, the proof is in the bread pudding about how.
I love bread pudding.
I love bread pudding too. Now I'm hungry. David, right now, how are schools and students in New Orleans doing?
They're doing pretty well. We have to remember 84% are economically disadvantaged, 92% of children of color. So it's the poorest, biggest district in Louisiana. But in 2005, 62% of the kids attended schools rated F, failing. Today, 0% are in failing. They don't have any failing schools. In 2005, 54% of the high school students graduated in 4 years. Today, that's up to 79%. And if you included 5-year graduations, it would be higher because they have 3 or 4 alternative schools for kids who've dropped out, come back, for kids who've been in the criminal justice system, kids who've been expelled, and so on. And sometimes it takes them, they don't graduate till they're 19 or 20. 65% of their high school graduates today enroll in college, which is higher than the state average. Here's the state's poorest city. A higher percentage of graduates are going to college. That's, I think, unique in the country. And studies by Doug Harris at the Education Research Alliance at Tulane University have showed that they're choosing better colleges and they're staying longer than in the past. In 2005, the Black and economically disadvantaged students in New Orleans ranked 66th out of 66 districts. Today, they're second. English learners are third in the state. And then finally, the last thing I would mention is COVID and COVID recovery. I mean, COVID, the closure and the trauma of COVID hit urban districts particularly hard. New Orleans was very hard hit. But since then, New Orleans test scores have grown twice as fast as the state average, faster than all but 4 other districts in the state. And New Orleans is one of the very, very few urban districts where kids are testing higher than they were before COVID. So it continues to work. It's not always easy. These kids arrive at kindergarten already with an opportunity gap. New Orleans still has high crime, a lot of trauma from that. So there are a lot of struggles in the city of New Orleans, but there's really no comparison between before Katrina and today. In terms of an overall grade, the schools get a C grade from the state, about average. But remember, they're full of poor children of color. In terms of progress and how fast they're improving, they get an A grade from the state.
I'm cautiously optimistic we might get a B this year.
Yeah,
Comes out in November. We were only 1 point shy of a B last year.
that will be historic.
That will be historic. That would be historic.
Jarrell, you lead a charter school, and obviously this model has given you as a school leader a lot more autonomy, accountability around this work. What role does your school model, you believe, play in your ability to help improve the lives and outcomes for your students?
No, thank you. And again, I think Dave and Leslie are so clear, right, in what I get to be immersed in, right, in the system. We operate a high school model, never too late. We have 2 post-secondary programs here, one of them being Opportunities Academy, which is a citywide program for scholars with significant intellectual disabilities. And there is much to say around our ability to continue, right, to attract families and kids based on meeting their needs and seeing them. And so, at large, to Leslie's point, in an open enrollment system, we don't know who's going to walk through our doors. And while that might seem like a source of consternation for others, we love that, right? Like, there's something to be said of we're truly going to move the needle on this population because that's what the city and this climate deserves. So listen, everything I could reiterate, right? Everything that's been mentioned as sort of the variables or inputs that allow us to meet kids where they are and then drive them forward, it's underscoring it. And the beauty of not making a promise to a system, but to kids and families, right, drives our work each and every day. I also mentioned this briefly, that we have the privilege of operating a number of historical high schools, right? Legacy high schools, schools that were founded in the 40s and 50s and later. And it just shows that some of these schools are performing better than they ever have academically. And that's a great source of pride because I think it's one thing and important, right, to innovate from the ground up. It's something else to take something that has generational pride, right, community value, and say, this chapter, we're going to iterate and give you something that you're even more proud of. And I think that says a lot about what's possible in New Orleans, but I also hope folks who are interested in this model at large see that as an opportunity too.
Leslie, in the documentary, it highlights the impact that this sort of 3-legged stool that David had talked about, autonomy, accountability, and choice, played in the system and how it got here. If I would ask you, what do you most attribute the success of New Orleans right now? Choice, accountability, or autonomy?
Autonomy would be one, closely followed by accountability. I actually think choice is interesting. It is very expensive. We spend too much money on transportation. But when I talk to a school leader about what if we went back to attendance zones or really pushed attendance zone, he said, oh, don't do that. It changes the mindset of our school that we make certain to treat our families as customers. And I think that's also a very important mindset. But in terms of driving academic results or attention to kids, number one is overwhelmingly autonomy. I would add a 1A to that. And that is, I think I mentioned it before, I served on the state board for 12 years. I served on the school board for a term. The level of our school leadership far exceeds anything I've seen anywhere else. And it's a self-selection. Jarrell would not choose to be a school leader or a major, central office leader in a traditional district. He would walk away and go find something else to do. And so at the end of the day, it's what takes place in that school building that drives academic performance. And that is the autonomy. It is that it attracts a certain level of leadership, which is critically important because, as David has said, we face a ton of challenges, and it is but it is combined with accountability. We have executed accountability very consistently, and we've not deviated from it. So there are a set of rules, and if a school doesn't meet that, the school board has had the fortitude to say, you no longer have the privilege of operating the school.
In the time we have left, I want to touch on a topic that, for those who are watching, listening, or following education, or following politics and how the future of education is being discussed sort of in real time, they're hearing about a push for more funding for private schools, education savings accounts, and sort of a private response to public education. And so what is your response? And I'll ask all three of you to respond. What is your response to advocates and policymakers nationally who believe that private schools are the best approach to addressing COVID learning loss, stagnant NAEP scores, and inequitable educational outcomes for Black and Brown students? And anyone can start off.
I'll start off because Louisiana is one of those very pro-voucher ESA choice accounts. There's all this discussion of traditional public schools, charter public schools, private schools, and I would say the variance within each silo is far greater than the variance between silos. So I can have a high-performing charter and a low-performing charter, and I can have a high-performing traditional and a low-performing. I got in a major fight with Governor Bobby Jindal, and successfully pushed to have accountability to our vouchers. And what I can tell you is the voucher kids performed worse than the kids in the recovery school district. And so there were some fabulous voucher schools where those kids who got the luck of the draw and went to those schools got a great education. So the idea that we should hold public schools to this rigorous accountability, but rely on parent choice for all other accountability, to me is nonsense. Charters have parent choice, but we want accountability for charters, and we've learned we need that accountability. So if you're going to do ESAs, if you're going to do vouchers, to me, there has to be some standard of accountability to say where public money flows, there is a need to demonstrate that there are outcomes. And I think there will be excellent voucher recipient schools, and there will be some terrible ones.
David, Drew.
I just want to add to that, that when you have a voucher system or an ESA system, and let's say a high school student gets $10,000 to go to a private school, which is higher than in most places, what are parents going to do with that? Some parents, we all love our kids, so we're going to do what's best for our kids. Some of us are going to add $30,000 to that and buy a $40,000 school. Some of us are going to add $20,000 and buy a $30,000 school. Some of us are going to add $10,000 and buy a $20,000 a year school. And then parents who don't have any extra money are going to send their kids to a $10,000 school. And that school is either going to be a public school or a pretty poorly financed private school, because for high school, $10,000 per child is not a lot at all. What we're going to do is we're going to segregate by income even more than our school system is already segregated by income. And one of the biggest problems we face as a country is that this divide between those who are doing well and those who are not doing well. The college educated have done very well economically for the last 40 years, and the non-college educated folks have basically, if you look at the data, not done well economically. They've kind of stagnated, and that's created a lot of resentment of elites, which is one of the driving forces behind our toxic politics right now. So feeding that, increasing the segregation by income in our education system, to me, would be a huge mistake, a huge mistake. I'll make one other point, which is that when charters were invented, I thought that parent choice would be enough accountability. In other words, if a school was lousy, the parents would pull their kids out and the school would have to close because they didn't have enough kids. Well, we learned different. We learned in the charter sector that in really poor communities, if a school is nurturing and safe and warm, a lot of parents are happy. Some of those parents didn't make it past elementary school themselves. Some of them are immigrants. and they don't really know how well the school's doing academically, but it's a safe, nurturing place, and they're happy, and that school will stay open. And so we learned the hard way that there has to be another level of accountability. We have to actually step in and say, in the case of vouchers, say you can't get vouchers anymore because your performance is so bad. And Louisiana is about the only state that does that.
Jarrell, I'll give you the final word. What do you tell folks who say public charter schools are stagnant, and we need to go the private school route?
No. I mean, no. I'll give you more. I double click on what Leslie said about the importance of accountability. But she also used a term a little bit earlier. It was mindset. And I think one of the gifts of this system at large, right, is the mindset that I am responsible, right? My team is responsible. My adults are responsible for creating institutions that continually move kids, see kids, and attract families and kids. And part of what we do when we do it at our best is political winds, waves, noise happen. We are laser focused on what we need to do for kids day to day. So not to dodge the question and say there's a part of me day to day that says it doesn't matter. But in a sense, at our best, that's what I think leaders carry forward of what matters and what doesn't. And I look to people like Leslie and David to continue to drive the discussion and the movers and shakers that build the conditions that make our kids most successful.
I want to thank you all for joining us today for an amazing conversation discussion. Before we go, David, those who watched the snippet want to watch the full documentary really quickly. When does it become public? How can those who want to watch the documentary maybe bring people together, house parties, conversations around this? How can they do that?
So we have a website. It's Turnaround Documentary, all one word, turnarounddocumentary.com. And if you go there, you can indicate that you want to host a screening. The film previews our first showing is next Monday night in New Orleans at the New Orleans Film Festival. But there are already about 10 ed reform organizations that are planning screenings. And it will also be available on a streaming platform called Kinema, but that will be after November 9th. So you'll be able to get that from the website after November 9th. So turnarounddocumentary.com.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you, Jacobs, Jarrell Bryant, all you all who stayed on with us, an amazing conversation. Please go to the website, turnarounddocumentary.com, to learn more about the documentary. Have these conversations in your cities, in your school districts. Demand more. You deserve more. Our country needs this. You all have a great day. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time on our webinar series.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Curtis.